and Steve's boss, Holly Hathaway, quipped in a strong Vermont accent, "Your husband mustn't love you very much." When I asked what he meant, he said one word, elm. He was right. The elm and poplar Steve had cut for our 2 Ashley wood stoves didn't burn for shit. But we were learning. As with so many other transplants to rural areas of Vermont, the natives were suspicious of our motivations or sanity. Why would well-educated young people give up the comforts of the city or the suburbs for a poorly insulated farmhouse in the middle of the Green Mountain National Forest? We knew we were the subjects of gossip, some of it derisive or worse. But by our second year there, I was voted a Justice of the Peace for the town of Goshen, was recording oral histories of old-timers, and had organized a community club. Of course, the locals didn't know that I and the other hippies living at the end of the North Goshen Road had formed the North Goshen Secessionist Society, where we followed news of the war and its end and harbored ideas of seceding from the Union. When the locals rejected our plea to reopen the recently closed one-room schoolhouse, we founded the Acorn School, a parent cooperative where we thought our kids would not be exposed to mainstream ideas on gender identity, self-defense, or diet. Our school was a sublime failure. We lasted a year, then sent our kids to public school. Of course, it wasn't always rainbows and roses. After our interviews at Otter Valley, Steve and I had stopped in downtown Brandon, parking our rusty old VW bus in front of the Brandon Cash Market. Despina Loris, the diminutive store owner who had posted signs by the magazine rack that read, "This is not a library." Some of you will know of whom I am speaking. Glared at me as I tried to buy a few snacks. "Is that your thing out there?" she demanded. When I realized she was talking about our van, I conceded it was. She was nearly half my height, but formidable as Attila the Hun as she glared over her cash register. Indeed, she was so small that she had to stand on a little box to look over the register. "Move it," she commanded. "That's my parking place for my customers, and you are not one of my customers." I looked at the candy bars and soda in my hands. "Put them back," was all she said. It wasn't long, however, before Desi welcomed me into her store for late-night milk when the only grocery store in town, Humiston's Market, had closed. One time calling me at home on my party line phone at some ungodly hour to report that my oldest son was in the store in his cowboy pajamas, buying candy for a party he planned to have at daycare later that day. He'd ridden his bike down the mountain with the few dollars poached from my cookie jar, only to be stumped in his bold enterprise by Desi, who, I'm sure, loved dispensing that story for the next day or two. While Steve and I were among the first hippies to move into the area, we soon had lots of counterculture friends, many of whom lived in succession or together in 2 houses owned by Willis Barnstone and located outside of town on Long Swamp Road. Barry Nelson, who lived there with her husband Jim, tells frightening stories of local men repeatedly driving by their home late at night, driving at what they took to be threatening speeds, quite slow or quite fast. Perhaps she also heard shotgun blasts. And I must confess that in those early days I was a little anxious about walking by LeDuc's Bar, a famous or infamous Brandon hangout known for its amazing perch over the Neshabie River waterfalls, but also for having to replace its huge front windows on a regular basis after Saturday night brawls. I was far from sure how the locals, mostly men, felt about me with my waist-length hair and painted clothing, and Steve with his corkscrew curls and motorcycle boots. One day, one of the newcomers to town, a long-haired, skinny guy named Mike Lewis, stopped by to invite us to Leduc's for a drink. First of all, most of the hippies I knew weren't into booze or bars, and secondly, I wasn't interested in testing my popularity at Leduc's. The next day, Lewis showed up with the story of what had happened. He had been sitting at the bar. Oh, anybody remember John's last name? Churchill, maybe? Okay, I gotta look it up. The next day, Lewis showed up with the story of what had happened. He had been sitting at the bar next to state legislator Hugh Moffat and John the Indian, a Canadian Micmac who lived long in town, when Ray Downs, a remarkably strong plumber who'd saved Steve's and my butts every time our gravity-fed water pipes froze up, began teasing Mike about his long hair. "Hey, hippie, what kind of job you got that lets you grow your hair like a lady?" Downs asked, putting special emphasis on the word lady. Lewis was a wannabe poet who taught at the Brandon Training School, the state's residential facility for people with mental retardation. The school attracted many counterculture types because it offered alternative service to men wanting to avoid the Vietnam War. It also had a tight lesbian and gay community. Lewis was not gay and took umbrage with Downs' remark. As Downs ragged on, Lewis responded that he could grow his hair any way he wanted because he was a poet. The two really got into it then. And soon a scuffle ensued with Lewis hauling off and knocking Downs to the barroom floor. At that point in his story, Lewis conceded he was fairly frightened, surrounded as he was by all the big, brawling Brandon men, until Downs reached his hand up from the bar floor, cracked a grin, and announced, "Buy the lad a drink. We always needed a poet around here." Turns out, unbeknownst to most of us, Lewis had had polio as a child, and despite his chronic experience, had great upper body strength. The next night, a bunch of us returned with him to Leduc's, which we discovered served the best hamburgers, French fries, and homemade raspberry pie in Vermont. In no time whatsoever, we got to know all the locals and became regulars ourselves, and the nighttime drive-bys on Long Swamp Road ended. That's right, he carried a deer for 40 miles, I heard. He told me that, swore it was the truth. I have one more paragraph. Okay, so there's a long part that just tells a lot of stuff you don't want to hear tonight. But it's about gay marriage and Act 250 and Act 60 and all of the changes that the counterculture has brought to Vermont in many, many ways. Okay, so here's my last paragraph. There are, of course, Vermont residents, both native and transplant, who do not welcome gay marriage or environmental regulation or any of the myriad other changes that are the obvious outcome of the counterculture's impact on Vermont. Yet even they will concede that the very character of Vermont, a place that has always honored independence and the right to be different, remains strong. Simply put, the right to be different is what attracted the counterculture kids here in the first place. Somehow, I think, we've found a courteous balance between old values and new. It is true that a generation, mine, that of the counterculture, changed Vermont. Yet, as you will see in the next pages, we were equally changed by Vermont. Indeed, I like to claim, although many will deny it because I was not born here, to be a Vermonter. One who came seeking a place to call home, after the disappointments and heartaches and excesses of the 1960s, and found it among those rolling green pastures my father raced away from. Yeah. Dad. I love getting Dad in there.
Do you want to take questions?
Yeah, I will, if anybody wants to. George, do you have questions too? No? Do you have questions?
Questions, comments, anybody?
You said you interviewed a lot of people?
Yeah. You want to be interviewed?
Well, I'm 68 years old. And I
Well,
came
there you
up
go.
here in this community. Actually, from the 40s when I was born with my family. My father had bought property in Danville, outside St. Johnsbury. And my brother John organized a paint party for the house when we were all about 20 years old, in our 20s, in the 60s. And a brother and sister team who had come up with their respective significant others ended up staying, well, Sal ended up staying through the winter at our place, and by the end of the spring had bought the mountain next door with his sister on one end and her spouse, and at the other with his spouse. They were back to the earth people.
Mm.
We knew, through them, we knew about the commune up by Newport. Very curious about that stuff. I never got up there.
Well, there's a 67-page chapter on the communes in my book.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. And I was going to ask you about some of the people you interviewed, and
Uh-huh.
what you heard.
You're going to have to buy the book then.
Yeah, there were three big communes in the Northeast Kingdom, many smaller ones.
What's the name of your book?
Going up the country.
Okay.
You know that song? Huh? Yeah.
When will it be out?
In the spring,
In the spring. Good.
if I'm lucky, if they don't cut it to smithereens. I keep asking for more words. I got 10,000 more yesterday.
Oh,
Chuck didn't hear that.
Hey, more the merrier. I don't have no problem.
I followed your writings since we moved here in '79 from the San Francisco Bay Area. I was born in Oakland.
You should buy Octavia. Oop,
What's that?
there's a book called Octavia Boulevard.
When we first got here, the Middlebury Co-op, was just we'd break down the food and bring
Right.
it here to Brandon, and it'd be in somebody's living room, break it down,
Right.
everybody that wanted it.
Yeah.
I live in Ray Down's old house.
You do?
Well,
You know what I mean. I mean, he would come to the house. He came to our house on Christmas Eve, and he had a bottle of booze, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm Irish. I could drink. My husband of the time, not this one, the other one, the one I got rid of,
Good one.
the good one. No, he's the good one. He had about 2 drinks and spent the rest of the night in the bathroom. But I spent the night with Ray Downs, who ended up wrapping the presents with me and telling me stories about the deer that he shot, because it's December, we're still talking about hunting season, and tracked down for 2 days and killed with the knife and
Yeah.
carried on his back. And I loved Ray Downs. Yeah.
He had a bear tied up by the house.
Yeah, I know.
And he had bobcats in the basement, stuff you couldn't get away with nowadays. And he threw a bag of rattlesnakes on the floor of Leduc's one night. And, he would get somebody drunk and bet them they didn't have a bear in his truck. He'd bring the bear in the truck downtown. Throw him in the back of the truck with the bear.
I think we ought to write a book about him.
And he was quite a character.
He was quite a character. I mean, they all were. How lucky you were to be here then.
Yes.
I mean, I couldn't possibly imitate Holly Hathaway's accent. I know I couldn't understand what people said when I first got here.
Well, you'll hear about Ray again because they were wondering where that signal light at the police station in Brandon, where that came from. Of course, we kind of kept it's secret all this time, but it's secrets out. It used to be at the end of Park Street, where the four corners are, on Marble Street and Park Street extension. But it never worked right, so Ray came up there with his buddy one night and blew it back down with a shotgun. So, and it was been in the town hall ever since. And so the police station, it's funny, the police station has this symbol of being corrupt. You know?
Love
Along
it.
with their 9/11.
I love it. There goes another chapter in the book. Yeah.
Thank you, Yvonne. This is amazing. I was born in 1950, and so the initial part of what you were reading just went into me like a resonance. You know, it's like this is the children are privileged. Our parents didn't talk about these wars. We grew up in this period of death, and the monuments, all the pictures in your words were there in my life too. And even though I grew up in a little town in the Mississippi and Wisconsin, I lived in Minnesota and Michigan, and then found my way here, and I've sort of inserted myself into the Vermont thing too for the last few years and helped to maybe affect the trajectory of this town in a lot of different ways. But you know, I was thinking about the Navajo have this saying that says, "The ones who tell the stories have the power." And in your words, there's this powerful story of your personal experience. And I was thinking, some of the children I work with, like 12th graders that I teach, and some of the other work I've done with kids, is to get them to tell their stories, right? So I came from a place in Wisconsin. In 6th grade, I read The Secret of the Old Salem Desk, you know, and it was a story about Southwest Wisconsin and a very personal story of this thing. And I can still remember, you know, you talk about the things that live in you, the memories, the rear view movie and all that stuff. And I was wondering, do you teach too, or have you brought this out in a way that, because your personal testimonial of your own life trajectory was so powerful for me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank
And I would love to see, it's one of the things to me that's missing in the world, because we hear so many of these stories on the news, but they're not real, they're virtual, they're made up, they're not connected to something as visceral as this.
I just retired after 20 years of teaching at San Francisco State, so I've been bi-coastal for 20 years.
That's where I went.
Yeah.
Woo!
Golden Gator. Gator.
Yeah, I taught journalism and creative nonfiction, so to the people.
And I would hope
Yeah,
more
San
people can
Francisco
actually
State, the people.
hear your story too, you know, where maybe like that Arlen has tonight, even just the reading of those, the idea of a story of your life spoken is a powerful thing that can go on teaching even after this.
Thank
So
you.
Thank you for that.
People are probably tired, huh?
I don't know, everyone seems
No.
pretty wrapped.
He's got it. I was born in 1950, and just word for word, I could have written that as well. Just like.
Wanna? I mean, I've been living this for two, well, I've been living it my whole life, but, you know, I mean,
How long have you been writing the book?
my whole life.
No, I know,
Yeah.
but basically this
I know.
contract and.
2 years?
I would say almost 2 years,
Yeah.
I mean, in earnest, I think you really started in last fall.
Yeah.
I mean, really
Yeah, I mean,
pedal to the metal. And you know, every day it's, I mean, Yvonne is up at 5:30, and she's on the couch
Perfect time.
writing, and I'm sleeping. And I wake up and make the coffee, and she's writing, I'm reading. I go to work, I come back, she's writing.
but half the writing is throwing away, right?
Oh, yeah.
Half of it,
Right.
a lot of it is throwing away.
But writing is
So-
never wasted, so whatever you've done is still there. That's
It's just cooking.
If I could find the disk drive that I lost when we went west this winter, there's a disk drive that I've torn my house apart that has some essential elements on it that won't be in the book, because they're gone. Yeah.
I'm curious, you are also a reporter
Right.
at the Herald.
Right.
And what is the difference in telling a story, say, for the newspaper and then writing something like this, which is sort of memoir, et cetera, but it's strikes me that it's two different kinds of writing.
Well, the book itself will not be a memoir. I mean, I'm only first person in the prologue,
Yeah.
okay? This is not going to be my whole story. That's the next couple of books. But I didn't go to journalism school, and when I came to the Herald, I had, been writing poetry and had degrees in philosophy and English, right? And so there's formats in journalism where you do the very straight 5 W's and you're removed from it. And I did a million of those, but I also did another million magazine or more narrative style stories. And I was really lucky because I got editors that would let me do that kind of writing, and I worked for the Boston Globe at the same time. And I was able to do that kind of writing. And I learned really early on that when you have a scene in the beginning of a piece in which you show people doing whatever it is that the story is about, that then you've got them, and they'll stick with you for the rest of the story. Okay, so I have taught that way, that there's two kinds of writing in nonfiction. So journalism is a form of nonfiction. You want just the facts when you're covering the selectmen's meeting, right? But if you're writing a story about the town clerk that's been in office for 60 years, you want it to be a narrative with a shape and an arc, and it have real stuff in it, right? So it's two different kinds of writing. I don't know, did I answer your question?
You kind of did.
Yeah. But one reason I'm not doing journalism anymore for newspapers and magazines is there's no room for that. Nobody wants it, and they won't pay you enough to do it. So I'm just writing books. So it's more fun. It's longer. I'm long. I'm very tangential mentally, anyhow, as you might have noticed. So, yeah.
The other thing about journalism is there's no I in it. Unless it's
Oh,
an opinion
yeah.
piece.
Good point.
And, if you're writing opinion, that's a different story,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
the stuff Yvonne did, the investigative stuff, she was never in it.
Yeah.
It was, but she was putting people's stories together.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
the memoir is
Different.
the other
Yeah.
GI stuff.
I think they're both really important. I mean, I think novelists get all the glory, but I really think that poetry and nonfiction are essential to our lives, yeah. Yeah, I think we've had enough.
Anyway, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ooh. Wow. Hang on, don't go. So that was just an absolutely fabulous evening. I have to say, when Yvonne was a journalist in 1987, she wrote the first article on the carving studio that I founded in 1987. And
That's when we met.
That's when we met. We're not sure that we've seen each other since then, although we've heard about each other. So it's been a very, very special evening to have George here. George, come on up for a minute. Let's get a hand for all of you. Yeah. Big hand for an absolutely great evening. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for the fullness of your sharing. You missed it? Oh, come on. Photo op, okay? So please, there are more refreshments. There's time for conversation. Don't run away. We're very happy to have you and plan to come back next month. And we know what is waiting at the other end of the table there. Wonderful books waiting to be signed. Thank you.
In fact, one of them even used his name in there. Yes, here it is. You want it? I'll send it she's going around